I want to dive in because we have a packed program today. You're going to be hearing from a whole bunch of different perspectives. We've got sectors that span the globe. We've got some folks from governments around the world. We have the community-led working groups that many of you have been joining for weekly calls, where we've sort of identified some areas that we need to collaborate on collectively. So we're going to dive in. This morning, we're going to start with our friends. We used to just say right across the Atlantic, but since we're in California now, it's across America and then further across the Atlantic. Some of you have been tracking the draft Cyber Resilience Act that the EU Commission released in the fall. We're very excited that S-BOM is a part of it, and it's certainly a part that a lot of people are talking about. So we're very excited to have Benjamin Boegel from the European Commission staff to talk a little bit about it. And I'm looking for my team to make sure that we've got him ready and online. Thank you. There, oh, Benjamin, we need to start in just a second. We can't hear you yet. Oh, Benjamin, can you unmute yourself?
Sorry. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Good morning / evening from Brussels. I'm Benjamin. I'm part of the CRA drafting team. The CRA is a new legislative proposal for a European law. It came out in September last year. You're probably not all of you are familiar with how European laws are made, so I brought one slide to quickly explain it. So the European Commission, which is based in Brussels, proposes draft legislation, and then the two so-called co-legislators, the European Parliament and the Council, which represents the 27 member states, they then discuss the law and they negotiate with one another, and the outcome of these negotiations at the end, well, that constitutes the final law. So, I mean, as I said, the proposal came out in September. We're currently in this stage where both Parliament and Council are discussing the text, and we're hoping to get it adopted sometime next year. So, I mean, in a nutshell, what is the Cyber Resilience Act about? I mean, it's a regulation. That will be directly applicable in all the member states, and it seeks to decrease the amount of vulnerabilities in hardware and software products. So the cheese here represents a product with digital elements, as we call it, and you can see there are a lot of vulnerabilities, a lot of holes in the cheese, and we want to reduce the number of holes. We know, of course, that we'll never reach zero, but we want to make a substantial contribution to reducing the holes. So one could argue that, I mean, the CRA follows a holistic approach. So here's one slide that shows all the main elements of the proposal. So there will be cybersecurity rules for the placing on the market of products. So that means that at the time when you place a product on the European market, irrespective of where it is developed, it will have to comply with certain high-level, objective-oriented cybersecurity rules. Yeah, I mean, really high level. So something like ensure confidentiality of data, ensure protection of access, and so forth. It's not more specific than that. It's really that high level. And for building the framework, we are tapping into an existing framework at European level, the so-called new legislative framework. It has been used for safety regulation, for product regulation, for the purpose of ensuring safety of products in the past. So for instance, machinery in Europe or toys or medical devices, they already follow that approach. And we are basically now adapting that approach to security. In the text, you will find obligations for manufacturers. So, I mean, I think you call them vendors actually, but in the new legislative framework world, they're called manufacturers. Then also for distributors, these are basically online shops or brick and mortar stores, as well as importers, which are entities that they import products from third countries outside the Union and place them on the European market. Of course, the majority of obligations in this act will apply to manufacturers because they are the ones that will have to do the secure coding. So as I already explained, the requirements, we call them essential requirements. They will be very high level. There are two types of requirements: product feature requirements, as the ones I just described in my examples, as well as process requirements. Process requirements, that's essentially requirements ensuring that manufacturers fix vulnerabilities in their products even after placing those products on the market. In our Commission proposal, the idea is that you have to fix vulnerabilities for a period of 5 years. But it's no secret that in the negotiations between Parliament and Council, this has evolved, and we may be looking at a longer time period, maybe more oriented, maybe more along the lines of the actual lifetime of the product, but it's still subject to negotiations. So as I explained, the requirements are very high level. But manufacturers, they of course need to know very specifically what they should be doing. And for this, we will develop harmonized standards at European level. So the Commission will ask the European standardization organizations, which essentially gather the manufacturers of hardware and software products. And the organizations will be asked to develop standards, which will then become adopted by the Commission as harmonized standards. There is absolutely no obligation to follow such a standard, but the standard has one crucial advantage for manufacturers. It gives a presumption of conformity, which means that under normal circumstances, if nothing goes wrong, market surveillance will assume that your product is built correctly. There is also the element of conformity assessment. So for the vast majority of products, manufacturers can actually do the conformity assessment themselves. They can by themselves look at the products, check whether they comply. But for a narrow category of what we consider roughly 10% of the scope of the regulation, manufacturers, they will have to either be required to follow a harmonized standard or go to a third party. And that third party will then check the conformity. And finally, as the last element, there will be the market surveillance. So all 27 member states in the Union will be required to notify market surveillance authorities who can check the products after they have been placed on the market. One quick slide on the scope. I already mentioned it. So we cover hardware and software products, both final products as well as components. So a component, for instance, would be a CPU when it comes to hardware, or a software library when it comes to software. We only cover products made available in a commercial context. So anything that is a hobby is not covered. And the same goes for open source. This has been asked a number of times. How do we deal with open source? Again, only commercial open source projects would be covered, and all others would be outside the scope. The regulation is only about products and not about services. Services are already covered by other European legislation. So maybe you've already seen the CE marking on your smartphone charger. So in the future, when you see the CE marking, it will not only ensure users that the product is safe, but also that it's secure under the Cyber Resilience Act. This is a meeting about S-BOMs. So what is the role of S-BOM in the CRA? First and foremost, manufacturers, they will be required to draw up an S-BOM for their products. So they have to identify all the components that they use in their products. This is mostly done to help manufacturers be better at vulnerability handling and so forth. We followed a little bit the approach of US guidance on S-BOM, which says that you should first and foremost document the top level dependencies in your product. So this is also the case for the Cyber Resilience Act. There's absolutely no obligation to publish your S-BOM. It's really for the manufacturers to help improve their own processes, but it also has to be included in the technical documentation. The technical documentation is a list of documents that the manufacturer has to compile to demonstrate conformity, and where you have to go to a third party for conformity assessment, you submit this technical documentation. And in addition to that, market surveillance authorities, they will also have the right to request the submission of the S-BOM. So this would, of course, be done whenever a vulnerability in a product is discovered or when there is reason to doubt the security of a product. Finally, the proposal also foresees an empowerment for us, for the Commission, to further specify the format and elements of the S-BOMs that would have to be generated. But I cannot tell you at this point that we are actually going to use this empowerment. It's really just an empowerment to future-proof the regulation. And I can definitely assure you that if we were to use that empowerment ever, we would definitely be relying on international standards, existing S-BOM standards. So we would not want to reinvent the wheel in any way. And yeah, one last slide on the timeline. I already said it. The proposal was adopted on 15 September. It's now being negotiated. We have European elections next year in June. We are hoping to finalize the negotiations by then, and then it would enter into force. All the standardization work would start by then. And then 2 years later, I mean, the transition period is still subject to negotiations, of course, but around 2 years later, it would then enter into application for the manufacturers. And that's it already. Thank you so much.
For taking that time. I don't think we have time for questions from the audience, but I do have one quick one for you, which is folks can find out about it by looking up online. If they wanted to get in touch with your staff, is there sort of a feedback mechanism that they can learn more or weigh in?
So the official feedback periods, they are already closed. There were 2 feedback periods. But what I can do is I can provide my email address in the chat.